Today is September the 30th, 2004. We will be interviewing Dr. Ervine Pete Inglis. The interview is being conducted in Marietta, Georgia. The interviewer is Jack W. Boone for the Marietta Golden K Kiwanis Club. The camera is an RCA Pro Edit. Dr. Inglis, what is the date of your birth?
January 29th, 1922.
Are you currently retired as a medical doctor?
Yes, I retired in 1988.
What military service were you in during World War II?
I was in ASTP, which is Army Specialized Training Program in the Army, and then after an internship, I was in the U.S. Air Force.
So the Air Force was your primary branch of service?
Yes.
How long were you in the service?
Approximately 5 years total.
What was the highest rank you attained?
Captain.
What was your serial number?
017668808.
What was your assignment during the service?
In ASTP, I was just a student, medical student, and then I was a flight surgeon and medical personnel in the Air Force.
Were you married at the time?
Yes.
So after you finished your training, they called you to active duty?
Yes. After 4 years of medical school and a year and a quarter of internship, then I was called to active duty and was given an opportunity of Air Force, which I took, and went to flight surgeon school.
Why did you pick that particular branch of service?
I always liked airplanes, and I thought I would enjoy that much more, and I enjoyed the travel.
Do you recall the first days you were in the service?
Vaguely.
Could you tell us something about that?
We were just, we had a Sergeant Alexander, as I recall his name was, and we met with him periodically about once a week, and he lectured to us on Army procedures and protocol, and we did minor drill field work.
So you didn't go through the conventional boot training that other soldiers went to because you were in medical school?
Had no boot training.
Yeah. Okay, did you get through it satisfactorily?
Yes.
Now you served in World War II and after. Where exactly did you go?
After my internship, I went to Randolph Field in San Antonio, Texas, for 3 months of medical school, flight surgeon school. And then I was sent to Yokota Air Force Base in Japan.
What was your job assignment there?
I was a general medical officer, which meant primarily dispensary work on officers and enlisted men and dependents. And then as a flight surgeon, I had some extra duties. Our training qualified us to take care of flight personnel because we were more familiar with their problems and with their procedures. I was required to have 8 hours of 8 hours of flying time per month to be able to relate to the flying personnel and to become more experienced with their problems and give them better care.
I know you have written down one of your most memorable experiences. I wonder if you would read that to us, please.
Yes, In about June 1948, I was a flight surgeon in Japan, and we flew A-26s and some B-29s. There were also Lockheed P-80s on the base, which was our first fighter jet. Our unit was on maneuvers at a deserted Japanese fighter strip on the west coast of Japan for 1 week. Our main mission was a simulated bombing raid on Hokkaido, the island just north of the main island of Honshu. This was a maximum effort of all 12 of our A-26s. The A-26 is a red-hot attack bomber built by Douglas with 2 engines and with a crew of 3. Our mission was for 7 hours, which is the maximum range. And the mission had gone smoothly despite poor weather. As we were getting closer to home, I noticed the clouds were touching the tops of the mountains. Then suddenly the clouds were in the valleys too. We were going to hit the cloud bank at 220 miles an hour, and we had not performed a frontal penetration maneuver for our 12-plane formation. There was trouble ahead in the soup. Pete Kelly, my excellent veteran pilot, knew what to do. We were flying on the outside wing of the formation, so he did a fast climbing turn to avoid collision with other planes and with the mountains. We climbed up on top of the clouds, then let down over the ocean where there were no mountains, then picked up the shore. Now we were lost over a foreign land. We had only a walkie-talkie type radio, and we couldn't reach the other planes. Maps were useless since we had no initial point of location. When flying in formation, you don't navigate. You just follow the leader. We had no radar and no GPS, of course. It was raining and the clouds were very low. We did not know of any landmarks such as cities, harbors, rivers, airports, and so forth. We flew east and south, hoping to find our little strip. No luck, we were lost. Fear began to creep into my mind, and I began to regret that I was on flying status instead of a nice, safe medical assignment on the ground. I knew the chances of survival in case of a crash landing in a red-hot airplane or bailing out were not good. Strangely, I had no fear of death or injury. My mind seemed to be filled with joining Ruth, my beautiful wife, whom I had not seen in 8 months. At that moment, she was aboard a troop ship and was approaching Yokohama. I'm sure I uttered a few prayers. As we flew along in the rain and clouds, I was looking for anything familiar from our previous flights. We flew over some power lines, which looked vaguely familiar, and I yelled to Pete to follow them. Nobody can navigate by power lines, but since he was grasping for straws, he did. By some miracle, our fighter strip showed up, and Pete made a landing without running out of gas. Maybe God was our co-pilot. On the ground, we were warmly greeted, but bad news. 9 of our 12 planes were safe, 3 were not. 2 had collided in the clouds, leaving 3 dead, and 1 had ditched in the ocean, leaving 2 dead. As the only doctor on the maneuvers, it was my job to jump into the waiting ambulance and rush to the crash site about 40 miles away to identify the bodies. I never had seen a crash before, nor ever seen any dead crewmen. There had been no fire. In the collision, the propeller of one plane had cut the fuselage of the other plane. The gunner fell out and opened his chute and survived. The pilot, Lieutenant Jerry Hunt, who was a good friend of mine, was able to bail out when his plane turned upside down. His chute opened just before he hit the ground. The co-pilot was killed. The other plane, piloted by B.J. Thomas, who was also a good friend of mine, was killed, as was his co-pilot. Identifying B.J. was a gruesome ordeal. His body and flight suit seemed to be filled with gravel and skin instead of bone and limbs, but I was able to identify him. A sequel to this horrible story occurred about 2 years later while I was serving a surgical residency in Baltimore, Maryland. I was called out of bed about 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the emergency room to sew up a bus driver who had been hit in the head with a beer bottle. When I walked in the emergency room and glimpsed the patient, I suddenly felt funny, as though the hair of the back of my head was standing up on end, or some strange feeling. I felt a little dizzy and faint. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but ignored the sensation. I quickly recovered and sutured his scalp. When I had finished sewing him up, I went over to the desk to fill out the chart. I noticed that his name was Thomas. I asked him, was he related to B.J. Thomas? He replied, yes, he was my brother. He was killed in a plane crash in Japan.
Pete, do you recall the day your service ended?
Yes, it was a great day in Seattle.
Where were you?
Fort Lewis, I think, Seattle.
What did you do in the days and weeks afterward?
Then I went to Baltimore, Maryland for a 2-year surgical residency, as I mentioned earlier. Then after that, we settled a general practice here in Marietta, Georgia in 1950, and I retired 38 years later after doing general practice, solo general practice, which was great, particularly since my interest in airplanes, and one big project I got involved in was writing a book on the B-29. This B-29 was built here in Marietta, Georgia, 688 of them out of approximately 4,000.
Hold it up just a little bit more so they can see the cover. That's good. Thank you very much. Is that the only book you've written?
Yes.
Okay. Was any of your education supported by the GI Bill?
No.
Okay. Did you make any close friendships while you were in the service?
Not unusually, no.
Okay. You didn't continue any of those relationships?
Yes, we've maintained contact with them some, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did you join any veterans organizations?
No.
Okay, so your career after the service was in medicine all the way.
Yes.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war, about the military in general?
Yes, I've continued my association with Lockheed and to a certain extent with the Air Force, and I have great appreciation for those in the service who have been in combat.
Do you attend any reunions?
Not very many, no.
How do you think your service and experiences affected your life?
Well, the trip to Japan was a fantastic experience. This was a great time to be in Japan right after the war, and I enjoyed every day of that. Matter of fact, we almost extended 1 year. We had such a good time.
Is there anything you'd like to add to this interview?
No.
Well, thank you for sharing your recollections.